Aside from the story of Jesus' death and resurrection, I believe that the story of Adam and Eve is the most important story in the entire Bible. So much so that without it, the rest of the Bible would simply not make sense. For if we don't understand sin, we cannot understand salvation. But before understanding the answer, we must first understand the question. The problem with Adam and Eve's sin lies in the belief that they were created perfect. A perfect being cannot make any mistakes or do anything wrong. Therefore, a perfect being cannot sin. If Adam and Eve were perfect, then they simply would not have sinned. If they were not perfect, then that would mean that God created imperfect, flawed beings, in turn making sin God's fault. So were Adam and Eve really perfect? Let's see what the Bible says. Note that it does not say that He created man perfect, but rather that He created man good. In fact, if we think it through, we see that no being aside from God can be truly perfect. For one to be truly perfect, one would have to have certain qualities that are simply not possible for man. If one were not omniscient, for example, it would mean that one does not know everything, meaning that there are things that one does not yet know and can still learn. In other words, there is room for improvement, which is contradictory to perfection. Now, this does not mean that God created imperfect, flawed human beings. It just means that man's so-called perfection is different from that of God's. Where man's perfection is limited, God's perfection is clearly not. Where God's perfection is part of His own nature, man's perfection depends on his relationship with God. In other words, man was not created perfect in the literal sense. Rather, he was created good in the biblical sense. Now, there is one more aspect to man's creation that we must discuss before answering the question at hand, and this is called free will. Aside from being created good, man was created free. And if you recall, man's perfection or goodness depends upon his relationship with God. In other words, man was free to either continue his relationship with God through obedience or to sever his relationship with God through disobedience. As we can see, man chose the latter. With that in mind, we can now go back to the question at hand. Why did Adam and Eve sin? The answer is, they chose to. Having understood what has been said thus far about true perfection, man's goodness, and free will, we can see that there is no contradiction between Adam and Eve's created nature and their choice to sin.